everybody. I'm Dr. Christy Taylor, career and executive coach and founder of Work Global News Magazine. And I'm excited today to bring you another great interview for our Changemaker series. Today, we're talking to Ujwal Arkalgud. He is a cultural anthropologist turned entrepreneur. He built and scaled a tech company, motive-based, without outside capital, and then sold it on his own terms. And today, he focuses on helping other entrepreneurs to overcome barriers and to scale their business. Hi, Ujwal. How are you today?
Very good. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, I always say, I do a brief introduction, and then is there anything that you want to add to this? Because I'm ready to jump into this conversation with you. I'm so excited.
No, I think we can jump right in. I think the only thing I will say is that my entire career is full of situations where the path that I was supposed to take wasn't the path I ended up taking. So I think we'll sort of see that thread play out over the next little while as we talk.
And that's what we talk about in this series. We here at Work Global News Magazine, we are a workplace focused magazine, but we bring in people who have experiences like you to share their stories, right? To share the unexpected. And I'm sure that the road that you went down, launching and scaling a business without having to raise additional capital, and then taking all of the things that you learned from that, and now you're helping and inspiring other entrepreneurs. So I'm going to just jump right into this first question, right? Because the work that we do here is helping to motivate other people, and you have built and exited a company without VC backing, and something that many founders are told is nearly impossible. So I think that that's really cool. Now, what mindset or strategy helped you to push forward, and then when the startup playbook said it couldn't be done?
I think the biggest thing was when we started, we tried raising capital from venture capitalists. Mm-hmm. But very quickly, I realized that there were so many, I call them invisible barriers because, they're not hard written rules, but you can see them. You go to these meetings and VCs don't want to hear about some guy starting a company that's doing anthropology. That sounds complicated. Mm-hmm. On top of that, I don't have a PhD in anthropology. I'm obsessed with the field of social cultural anthropology. I'm extremely well-read and have been obsessed for the better part of 15 years, but that's not enough for a VC. I don't have a Stanford education. I don't have I didn't show up with a business plan that said we're going to scale to $100 million, because I thought realistically that's not going to happen in terms of what we're trying to build, and that's okay. And so I realized very quickly that the game is rigged, right? It's rigged to favor a certain type of company, a certain type of founder with certain types of credentials and background and experience. And I didn't fit any of that. Neither did my business partner. So we had to find a way to navigate around that. And, the first few months we were just so bogged down and disappointed. And, in the early days, you feel like if nobody else believes in your idea, maybe it's not worth pursuing, and you question yourself. Mm-hmm. But, I had to kind of go back to my own training and roots as an anthropologist to say, let me take a step back and actually think about this through the lens of culture. And I realized very quickly that the best thing I could do for myself was figure out what these rules are, these invisible rules, and how I can navigate them. And I know we'll talk more about this. And in fact, that's what's inspired me to write a book now about that topic as well, because that was really the turning point for me. You talk about mindset. The moment I got smarter about instead of trying to go against the system and going, rah, rah, revolution, I'm going to try to change everything, I got smarter and sat back and went, okay, how does this work? And how do I play this better? And that's really what changed everything for us.
Yeah, I want to get more into this book. I was looking at your bio, and one of the statements when you're talking about your experience, that the experience taught you that the biggest barrier to success it's not always about the products or market. They're often the perception, the bias, and as you talk about the unwritten expectations that no one talks about. And so you often talk about this invisible rule book in entrepreneurship, and I think we can kind of jump right into. Of course, I have my questions, but I think this is, like I was telling you again, this is a natural conversation, right? And you talk about these invisible rules in entrepreneurship, kind of share, that experience. So for those unfamiliar, what are some of those most critical unwritten rules and that hold founders back without them even realizing it?
Yeah, so I mean, just to define it for a second, invisible rules really are a set of barriers, a set of requirements that they're not hard and fast rules, but
Mhm.
they dictate who gets success, how success should be achieved, and what success should look like, right? So, for example, who gets success? I certainly don't look like a typical startup founder.
Mhm.
You know, what, how do you get success? You know, you have to go raise VC rounds and go do a pre-seed and a seed and a series A, B, C, and then you exit or IPO. That's sort of the standard
Yeah.
mantra. And then what does success look like? Oh, you've got to be, burning the midnight oil. Don't worry about your family or your friends. You have to, um, give it all for the next 10 years of your life or 15 years of your life and sacrifice your health and well-being. This is what I mean by invisible rules. And we're told that this is somehow some kind of romantic ideal that we should pursue as entrepreneurs and that this is the way to live. But in reality, it's actually extremely limiting. And so one of the things that I realized sort of reflecting on this is that in there's three common ways in which this affects us or this presents barriers to us. One of it is identity. So, what kind of education we have, what background we come from, where we're from. Even I'm Canadian, even being Canadian was often a challenge because people automatically assume that if you're Canadian, your company is somehow less relevant than if you're an American company. Uh, on the world stage, I don't just mean selling to other American firms, which is very interesting. So one is identity. The other is credibility. So what kind of education you have, how much experience you have. Have you done this before? It's sort of this vicious cycle. There's always a first time for everything, but apparently other people don't think you can be successful if you've never done entrepreneurship before. And so there's attention. I kind of use the three-pronged framework of attention, credibility, and ultimately what I call self-investment, which is when people think you're credible, then they will invest in themselves by working with you and helping you. And for these three things to happen, there's so many insurmountable barriers because you don't have the network that other people have that have been through this or that know other VCs or know other people in the industry. And so for us as first-time founders, we just found, we weren't insiders. We didn't have our PhDs and Stanford degrees, and we didn't have any of those things to get us in front of customers, get us in front of venture capitalists. We couldn't do any of that. Instead, it was, sort of old school grunt work. We had to go in and prove to people why they should take a call, why we have something of value to say to them and provide them with. And this is where the entire work that I do comes into play, because what I realized, Christy, really kind of going through this process myself, is that the best thing I can do now, having gone through my exit, is show other entrepreneurs. And, at the start of the podcast, you talked about how, your role through these podcast series is to inspire people. And
Mhm.
that's partly what I'm also trying to do, is to show entrepreneurs or would-be entrepreneurs, people who are thinking of taking the leap, but they hold themselves back thinking, I have two kids, like I can't work 15-hour days. I can't do all these things. And so really talking about invisible rules and teaching people how to navigate it is a way for me to inspire people and to show them that there's other forms of achieving success and other definitions of success along the way.
Yeah, I was listening to you, and I think now my specialty is not entrepreneurship when it comes to career coaching, right? I'm working with people who, I work with social impact professionals who are currently in the marketplace, and I'm here in DC right now, which, there's a lot of people who are going to be looking and searching for jobs. But one of the things that I often run into is the same thing with mindset, right? And trying to define what success is, and those same invisible barriers. You're telling entrepreneurs to take control of their mindset and don't put limits on themselves when it comes to pursuing what they want, right? Even if it means whether you're getting funding or not. And it's really the exact same experience in a different way. When I'm talking to people about their careers, I think that just as human beings, right? we put these limitations on ourselves. And even though there's these systemic and systematic things that exist in society, sometimes we are doing this to ourselves, which makes our journey much harder. Now, I want to talk a little bit more about your background as a cultural anthropologist. It gives you a unique blend into business. How has studying human behavior helped you to understand growth in ways most founders overlook? And then I kind of want you to, I'm going to merge a question here because I want you to touch on how your background helps you to understand the human experience, right? But then now, how do you use that to grow other entrepreneurs?
Yeah, absolutely. In terms of my background, I think the biggest thing is it, it teaches me to sit back and question or ask the why question. So when you see somebody behaving a certain way, you have to ask, why are they doing so? So as an example, my last company, Motive Base, it was a research product, and we sold that to large corporations, the McDonald's, Targets of the world. And yes, these innovation teams are buying research from us to make bets on next emerging trends and developments in technology. And one of the things we always found is that somebody will come and tell you, I don't have the right budget right now, or somebody will come and tell you, now's just not the time to change any of our internal processes. The typical entrepreneur will hear this and go, oh, that sucks. We can't work with this company right now. Timing is wrong, this, that. We'll go back to them in a year. But the reality is that for that call to have happened, most people, most salespeople, most entrepreneurs, even most people seeking jobs, we don't do the right kind of diligence. We Google something, we try to learn about some company. We don't do the right kind of diligence. So what is the right kind of diligence? It's asking the question of expectation, not the question of what is this person trying to do or what pain point do they have. So what do I mean by expectation? People ultimately have self-interest. As human beings, we all have self-interest. When we're in a job, we're thinking about, what can I do to get me that promotion or get me the raise or get me notoriety? We all want it. Our egos want fuel in order to keep energizing ourselves. And there's nothing wrong with that. After all, we're all human beings. That's absolutely okay. But I think, for us, when we were building our business, we had to understand for our customer, what is that's fueling them? What are the expectations that they place on themselves, their bosses place on them, their organizations place on them? And oftentimes we found it had nothing to do with actual work. It was expectations they had around, what kind of notoriety they wanted or where they wanted to speak or, what kind of, which meetings they wanted to be invited to. So I remember we made this big sale. I won't mention with which brand because it'll be too obvious, but we made this huge $500,000 deal, and it hinged on us realizing that the buyer really was not invited to the big kids table. He was an insights professional, but he was not getting invited to the senior VPs and the CMOs table for deep discussions about the next big bet. And the moment we realized that, everything we did was to help him achieve that. And we helped him achieve that within the first 6 months of our partnership. And then, next, and the rest, as they say, is history. But I think that's the one thing that always I come back to my training as an anthropologist. It's all about asking the expectation question and trying to put yourself in somebody else's shoes to say, what do they really want out of whatever it is that they're trying to do?
So you're looking at, now that is a new concept for me. When you as an entrepreneur, it's one thing we're talking about, we're looking at the customer base, right? Because that's all your standard language when you're talking about pain points and identifying your client base. But what you did was what I think is so unique, and correct me if I'm wrong. Yes, you were looking at the company, right? And making this deal with the company, but you looked at the person that you were working with. You looked at the motivating factor for the person that you were working with, because that person is going to champion the product or service even more because you're bringing them to the table and you're helping them get to that next level, right?
Absolutely. And if I may just add one thing, I think it might be relevant to also listeners, for example, who might be looking for a job right now or job hunting right now. We had this strategy we called the junior circuit. So what that meant is, before taking the call with the person we really want to talk to, we would go 2, 3 um, ranks lower, junior, often talking to somebody who's been in a job, maybe right out of school, a couple years. The reason is easier to get a meeting. They're more than happy to talk. If you can take them out for a coffee or a virtual coffee or what have you, you can ask them questions to understand the company. Hey, what's the pressure point in the company? What does your boss really want to achieve this year? And turns out they're more than happy to share these insights because they too are learning about the company,
Mhm.
and they don't have a voice, and they're happy that somebody is calling them, because normally all the sales action happens at the VP director level because they're the check writers, right? And nobody's talking to the juniors. And we found it was this incredible way of getting to the nuances of expectations within companies. And I recently helped a friend of mine find a job, and I had her do exactly the same thing. She called up a few of the juniors and said, "Hey, I have an interview coming up in a week. Could you help me understand the organization? What does this person really look for? What are some of the challenges happening? What's the politics like in the organization?" She got so much input that the conversation with the actual hiring manager was transformed
Mhm.
completely. And so there's a lot of these kinds of techniques that you can bring in when you start to think about expectations and human beings as just human beings with, you know, needs to feed their ego, if you will.
Well, I love that. I actually want to transition here. We're going to come back and talk a little bit more about the traditional business model. But I want to talk about your book, right? Because I think that this is a great segue because you do have an upcoming book, Mastering the Invisible Rule Book. And the goal of this is really, it aims to shift how entrepreneurs think. And I just love your mindset, the way you explain your process a minute ago. But the aim of this book is to shift how entrepreneurs think about credibility and value. And what was that third piece you added? It was the credibility, your three triangles. I like
Uh, yeah, the attention, credibility, and the
value. Yeah.
yeah, self-investment value. Yeah.
So what's one of the insights? Give me one insight from the book that you believe that every founder needs to hear in this interview.
Yeah. So, for example, if you're a new founder, under 1 million in recurring revenue, let's say, one of the challenges you have is to build credibility. Nobody knows you. You haven't been around long enough. So, what do you do? So, anthropology teaches us, sociology teaches us that there's ways to short circuit this in the buyer's brain. So you need two things for this experiment. The first thing you need to have a strong point of view. Every founder has to have a point of view. And Chrissy, maybe you're not surprised hearing this, but I can't tell you the number of founders I meet. They're great founders, great product, great ideas, great vision. They don't have a point of view on their industry. One of the first questions I ask them is, what do you think the future of your industry is going to look like? And they don't have a point of view. They haven't thought about it. So that's the one requirement you need to do, is think about having a point of view.
What do you say? You know what? Because I've been there. I was working with a coach, and she was like, "You are so neutral in everything." It's like, I do have a point of view, right? But what do you say to that entrepreneur who is who is like, well, I don't know, I don't want the point of view to come off as political, or
Right.
scared of shaking a tree, right? And I think that is what a lot of entrepreneurs find themselves in, that space of like, okay, I do have a point of view. That when it comes to like social engagement, it's always when you express that point of view. I know this recruiter she owns a resume writing firm.
Yeah.
She posts stuff that I would never post. Like but when she posts stuff, she will get like thousands of people responding to her. And that is because she has that point of view, right? She has a point of view that gives her this credibility. But so what do you say to those entrepreneurs who are like in that space where it's like, well, I don't want to come off as political, or I'm scared,
Right.
shake a tree. What are your thoughts on that?
So I give them this little trick, and the trick is to have a point of view that's counterintuitive, because you can have a counterintuitive point of view without it being too aggressive or, sort of, to your point, you can gently nudge the tree. You don't have to shake it too much. And I'll give you a great example of this. When we started MotiveBase, we knew that the trend analysis landscape was evolving heavily. Every corporation wanted to know what the next big trend was. So let's take a food corporation. Our point of view became, we would go to these companies and say, look, you think gut health is a trend. Actually, it's not a trend. It's a manifestation or an outcome of a trend. And then they'd go, what do you mean? So what is the trend then? And then we'd give them our point of view. Actually, the trend is people are becoming more proactive with their sense of well-being and how they feel. Gut health is a way to achieve that. And there's others. And they would immediately lean in and we'd get instant credibility. So in a situation like that, we're not ruffling feathers in a negative way. We're doing it in a positive way where we're saying something that kind of creates a bit of FOMO, a bit of, hey, what am I missing out on? And then you get a little moment to teach the prospect something that's unique about you. And instantly it gains you credibility. So this is a good example. And that's really what the book is about, is these tangible, tactical ways. So in the book, obviously, I first teach people what are these invisible rules. And then the majority of the book is tangible, tactical ways to apply it into how you engage with customers, how you build your product, how you grow your business, how you think about, scaling it, and so on and so forth.
Now, is the book already out? Do you have a date, or is it already
It's
available on Amazon?
it's actually 11 months away. It's in editing at the moment. It's in editing at the moment, but I just submitted the manuscript actually last month, and I'm getting the first edit back. And I think one of the reasons I'm starting to talk about it early is through the editing process, I have this unique opportunity to actually share a draft of the first few chapters with people that might be interested, with entrepreneurs and wannabe entrepreneurs in particular, and get their input, because my goal is, as much as possible, I want people to tell me, hey, these aspects are not clear enough, or you could do more to really lead the horse to water so that the book can be as effective and as useful as possible to people. So that's partly why I'm starting to talk about it early as well.
And I think that's a great thing now, because look, you're sharing this stuff from experience. I can talk about, I'm a historian. I'll always kind of look, and then my job full time is organizational development, which you're looking at human behavior for performance improvement in the workplace, right?
Yeah.
I want to talk a little bit more about your journey in entrepreneurship, because you've been through a lot of emotional highs. And I think that as we approach the end of this interview, I have a couple of questions left. I really want to focus on that mindset piece, right? You have been through so many emotional highs and lows, especially with your $25 million acquisition deal falling apart. How did you recover from that moment, and how do you guide others through similar setbacks? Do people consider you a coach? Is that what you call yourself?
I guess it's. I mean, it all feels a bit new because it's been about a year since I started my own investment firm. But my investment firm is dedicated to helping people who don't fit the typical VC model, just like it was for me. So my goal is, okay, if I'm making an investment or not making an investment, I want to actually help people and show them that there's a way outside of the typical, hyper growth pathway. So that's given me a lot of purpose in being able to do that. But coming back to the question about mindset, I think it's a really tough thing. It's easy for me to talk about it now, having been through it, but for sure in those moments, I was not, as calm as I am now explaining it. But what was it? About 4 years into our journey, we had a $25 million exit opportunity, and we got to the last bit, and then the buyer pulled out. And it felt like, the world came crashing down because, again, talk about, the bill of goods that culture sells to you as an entrepreneur. You define your identity and your purpose and this idea of success based on this exit and some arbitrary, X million number, and you think that's what's going to give you happiness and the feeling of success. And it's so challenging, but it was an incredible learning experience for us because it helped us separate the outcome from the experience. And I know this sounds a bit cliche, but the reality is that it made us realize that success isn't about the outcome of the exit. Success is about the fact that we get to every day, we get to solve these unique challenges, and we get to feel like we're outsmarting billion-dollar giants, which we did all the time to win, multi-million-dollar businesses. We outsmarted multi-billion-dollar corporations that have been around for 60 years to gain business from the McDonald's and the Targets and the Krogers of the world. And the reason we were able to do that was because we worked smarter. We didn't work harder. We certainly didn't have the money to throw at the problem. So I think to talk about mindset, it was really about separating the outcome from uh, the sense of fulfillment you get from going through the journey, and specifically defining what aspect of the journey is most fulfilling. So for my business partner and I, we knew that the facing challenges and solving challenges, that was the most fulfilling part. Because when we'd unlock something in the business model that would improve profitability or make us more efficient, it felt so satisfying to be able to do that and to be able to put our brains to that. So I think that's really the thing that really stands out to me, is really defining for oneself, what is it about the journey specifically that gives you a sense of joy, and focus on that. Focus your energy on that, and the outcome will come automatically, naturally, when you do that.
One of the questions I had for you was about defining success, but I feel like you've already addressed it. And I think that, so again, I work with so many people who are in social impact, social entrepreneurship, and it's just they have what they call passion, what is called passion fatigue, because they're doing heart centered work, and we're dealing with the pressures of everyday society of that. I have to make this X amount. When I hit this 10 million, nobody that I'm working with is hitting the millions, right? Because we're doing service and community based type
Right.
of work. But even still, there's certain numbers that they want to hit. I think that you just hit the nail on the head, actually, when it comes to defining success. You have to, from what I'm hearing from you, it's about identifying those pieces of the puzzle of the journey, right? That are meaningful to you, and the outcomes that are meaningful to you, that give you a sense of fulfillment. Do you want to add to that in any way?
No, I think that's exactly it. I think the piece is, everybody talks about the journey, but I think it's important for us to be specific about what aspects of the journey, because I think a lot of people don't do that. And when they don't do that, even when you think about how you divide your week up, and
Mm-hmm.
I talk to founders about this a lot. How do you divide your week and your month up in terms of how you're going to work? And if you have very clearly defined the aspects of that journey, the tasks that give you the most amount of fulfillment, that's where 60, 70% of your energy should go. Otherwise, you'll get burnt out so fast because you're doing the tasks you hate and they're just bogging you down, and then you don't get to do the things you love. So I think that's the only thing I would add, is that mindset, that sort of structure was critical for us, certainly.
So, so many aspiring entrepreneurs, they feel like that they don't fit the mold, right? To our as per our conversation today, of what a successful founder is supposed to look like. So, what's the one piece of advice that you offer to that you want to offer to someone building a business outside the system? And again, everybody here hears me say this every interview, right? It doesn't matter whether you're listening to this today, tomorrow, 10 years from now. The advice, what advice would you give to somebody who's working on building a business outside the system on their own terms with their own vision?
I think the biggest advice is that when you hit roadblocks, it's important to sit back and understand why the roadblock exists,
Mhm.
rather than focusing on the roadblock itself. So, I'll give you a great example. In the early days, so many situations where, so I'd walk into a room with a couple people from my team. Nobody ever assumed I was the CEO. Nobody. Everybody always looked at the white guy and
Or
started to talk to
the person with
him.
the tie and the suit
Yeah.
and
I was never the CEO, and then I had to speak and let them introduce myself, and this happened more often than it should, to be honest. So what do you do in that situation? This is just one of so many other situations we had. I remember once I was visiting my client in Raleigh, North Carolina, Burt's Bees, actually, and I got denied service at a bar. Uh, this stuff still happens nowadays. It's nuts. So what do you do? Do you take this situation and do you get bogged down by the fact that this barrier exists? Or do you ask why it exists and then figure out what you can do to outsmart it? We had this immense situation with a multinational, a Fortune 50 CPG company, Christy, and we were almost there. We'd done all the hard work, get to the final sale. This one person came in, and we knew that she was upset about us being hired. Her boss had already made the call, and she was doing everything on the call to undermine our credibility. And so when nothing worked, finally she said, Ujwal, you don't have a PhD. How can you come here and teach a bunch of anthropologists on this team with PhDs from world-class institutions? What is it that you can add? I don't see any value you can add, right? And so again, that's another example where you could just, in my head, I just wanted to curl under a rock and never come out again. But that's not what you do. When you become politically astute, you know why she's saying that. She's saying that because she feels her job is threatened. Maybe her value will be undermined. So suddenly you see the human being on the other side and you approach it very differently. So we deconstructed it, and I asked her, okay, why she felt that way. What were some of the areas that concerned her the most? And then we spent some time addressing that. Within 15 minutes, she was comfortable. And she realized we weren't there to take her job away. We were there to actually help her do better work. And within a month, she was our biggest champion in this Fortune 50 organization and actually helped us grow. So I think that's my one advice is don't get bogged down by the actual event or the thing that happens. Think about why it's happening and think about the human element behind it and figure out how can you get smarter? How do you find that little gap that other people aren't seeing and you can sneak in there? That's the best advice I can give people.
Yeah, and what I always tell people that there'll always be these, I deal with a lot of things in race context. I'm a historian, and I work in these spaces where I'm doing the hour. These social constructs will always exist in whatever society that you're in, right? It doesn't matter, but your mindset supersedes that, and that's what you really just spoke to: finding that hole, filling that gap, filling a need, right, and moving beyond that. Ujwal, it has been such a pleasure to interview you today. Your book is coming out in 11 months, but if people want to find you and connect with you, where can they connect with you? And of course, we'll have all of his information included in the description wherever you're listening to this. But where can people find you? And let us know if there's anything else you want to add to this conversation before we wrap up today.
No, first of all, I just wanted to express my gratitude. This has been such a fantastic conversation. Thank you so much. In terms of where to find me, I have a newsletter that I write weekly. It's very tactical and very actionable. It's called decisionlab.news. So you can find me there. You can also find me on LinkedIn if you search my name or the link that will be in the episode as well. And then, of course, I do have a book coming out. It is roughly titled Mastering the Invisible Rulebook. But if you follow me, you will definitely hear about it. And if you're interested in an advanced early draft and you want to give me feedback, I would welcome that. So please find me on LinkedIn and ping me.
Ujwal, again, it's been such a pleasure. Thank you guys for tuning in. Remember to check us out on Amazon, iTunes, and iHeartRadio, as well as our YouTube, Instagram, Facebook pages. There'll be an article attached to this blog podcast, and you got some great things ahead, brother. And so keep doing the work. And guys, check us out on workglobalnews.com. Have a great day.